In today's video, we're going to continue our NHL Season Preview series. And the team we're covering today is the Winnipeg Jets. And that's coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams. So if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, today we're doing a season preview video here for the Winnipeg Jets. Now this is the first time we've caught any of our season previews. We break these down into 4 segments. The first segment, we're going to recap the 17-18 season, take a bit of a deep dive into their team stats and really analyze how they did. The second segment we're going to call additions and subtractions, where we take a look at what's new to the roster versus what players are no longer with the club from last year. The third segment, we're going to take a look at the projected lineup for opening night. And then in a fourth and final segment, I'm going to give you my thoughts and predictions on how they will do for the upcoming 18-19 season. So let's jump in here and get started with their 17-18 season recap. The Winnipeg Jets had an absolute breakthrough, tremendous season in 17-18, finishing with a record of 52-20-10 for 114 points, finishing in second place in the Central Division and second place overall in the entire NHL. Obviously, if the Jets were in any other division, they would have been in first place. Nashville and Winnipeg were 1-2 in the Central as well as the entire league. So overall, a tremendous overall season here for Winnipeg last year. The Winnipeg Jets also had a fairly deep playoff run, falling short to the Vegas Golden Knights in the conference finals. The Winnipeg Jets had a very offensive group last year, putting up a total of 273 goals for the second most in the NHL. That's an absolutely tremendous result. Obviously, they got a lot of firepower within their forward group, and their defense certainly chipped in as well on the offensive side of the game. They also managed to keep the puck out of their net fairly well, only giving up 216 goals for 5th best in the NHL. Obviously, Connor Hellebuyck played a big role in that, as well as their overall team defense. The Jets' D-corps really made some huge strides last year and really improved their overall defensive play. Now let's take a look here at how the Jets did on special teams. The Winnipeg Jets finished with a power play of 23.4%, or the 5th best in the NHL. Obviously, that is a tremendous result. They were clicking on all cylinders in the power play last year, and it was a huge part of their overall offensive game and team success last year. The penalty kill certainly was not an area of weakness for them either. They finished with an excellent result at 81.8% for 9th best in the NHL. So obviously, this is a team that performed very well on special teams and very well 5-on-5. When the Winnipeg Jets scored the first goal last season, they had a record of 37-4-6. So obviously, scoring the first goal was something they did often, and they certainly were able to hold the lead throughout most of the game when that happened. When the Winnipeg Jets were involved in 1-goal games, they had a record of 13 wins and 4 losses. So amongst all the teams we've covered here in this series so far, certainly one of the stronger teams in 1-goal games. Obviously, when they only had 1-goal leads, they were able to lock it down. And they also showed the ability sometimes to come back and win when they were trailing by 1 as well. So overall, this team performed very well night in and night out all season long. When the Winnipeg Jets had the lead after 1 period of play, they finished the season with a record of 30 wins, 2 losses, and 2 overtime losses. So obviously, after 20 minutes of play, when they had the lead, which was in 34 times, they very often held that lead and did not look back. Even more impressive, after 2 periods of play when they had a lead, they had a record of 42-1-1. So it's pretty rare that this team ever went into the 3rd period and blew the lead. Absolutely phenomenal results here for the Jets. Now let's take a look at the scoring breakdown by period for the Winnipeg Jets to see if we can see any kind of trends or how they fared by each period. In the first period of play, they outscored their opponents by a score of 92-67 for a +25 rating. Obviously, that's a tremendous result. Like I said earlier on the stats here, when the Winnipeg Jets scored first, they quite often went on to win, and they quite often had a lead a high percentage of the time here after a period of play, or they were tied. So obviously, the first period was really good for the Jets last year. Second periods were pretty solid as well, outscoring their opponents 94-76 for a differential of +18. So not quite as good as the first period, but still nothing to be upset about. That's still a very excellent result. So overall, like I said, after 40 minutes of play, the Jets did have a lead or were tied at worst quite often here last year. The Jets did seem to tail off as the game went on, as obviously they played more defensive hockey. They scored a bulk of their goals earlier in the game. The Jets outscored their opponents 82-65 in the 3rd period for a +17 rating. So obviously, as you can see here, as the game went on, their differential per period was slightly lower, but really a lot of the times they were able to score a lot of their goals here in the first 2 periods and kind of play stronger defensive hockey later in the game. But really, they scored more goals in the 3rd period than a lot of teams did in other parts of the game too. So overall, this team was a real offensive juggernaut last year. The only part of the game where they were outscored by their opponents was in overtime, where they gave up 8 goals and only scored 5. So obviously 3-on-3 play last season wasn't the strongest part for the Winnipeg Jets, but really overall, nothing to be upset about there. Their breakdown by period is excellent results. Now let's jump over here and take a look at the additions and subtractions so we can compare last year's roster to what they have starting this year. Winnipeg Jets really didn't add a whole lot this offseason. They did have way more subtractions than additions. The main player they brought in was potential backup goaltender Laurent Brossoit, who formerly of the Edmonton Oilers here. They signed him. He'll compete with Eric Comrie for the backup goaltender job. Obviously, Connor Hellebuyck has the starting job on lockdown here, but Brossoit could potentially be the backup if they choose to leave Comrie in the American Hockey League still. Outside of that, he is really the only addition outside of a potential couple of rookies here that could play that's really notable at all to this team this year. On the subtraction side of things, they had a fair bit of guys leave town, mainly due to salary cap strains. Obviously, the big one was Paul Stastny, who was brought in at the deadline last year to be the number 2 center, which was a big upgrade. Played a lot with Line and Ehlers heading into the playoffs and the end of the regular season, and that was a very strong line for them as well. So losing Paul Stastny was a bit of a big blow, but I'm sure they'll recover here nicely. They can, instead of having Stastny there, should be able to give more ice time to a youngster like Jack Roslovic instead. So overall, it's not too big of a loss, especially what he got for a contract from the Vegas Golden Knights. I really don't think it was possible for the Jets to retain him and pay that type of salary. So obviously they will miss Stastny, but I think they'll still be in excellent shape here. Obviously, some other guys that are no longer with the club. They traded Steve Mason and Joel Armia to the Montreal Canadiens, which was primarily a salary dump. They had to make some room. Mason was later bought out by the Habs. Armia, on the other hand, looks as though he'll get a pretty good roster spot with Montreal for the coming season. Obviously, veteran defenseman Toby Enstrom was no longer with the club. He's going back over to play over in Europe. Veterans Sean Mathias and Matt Hendricks were not retained as well. They left via free agency, as well as goaltender Michael Hutchison, who was really playing a lot in the American League, but certainly has an opportunity to go play with the Florida Panthers here. Obviously, even though Luongo and Reimer have the 2 jobs at the NHL level, pretty much on lockdown here. There's been a lot of injuries between the two over the last few years. So he will be their go-to guy in their insurance policy in the American Hockey League should he get a chance here. But I do think Michael Hutchison does deserve another shot at being an NHL goaltender, even if it's only being a backup. He's performed admirably at the AHL level, and I think he does earn a chance, and will probably get that shot in Florida should Luongo or Reimer go down with injury this year. Now let's jump over here and take a look at what I project to be in their starting lineup here come opening night. Obviously in goal, you've got all-star goaltender Connor Hellebuyck. Obviously Hellebuyck was a finalist for the Vezina Trophy last year and had a tremendous breakout year for him. Hellebuyck had a big-time improvement year over year. The year before, his stats were pretty decent as well. We obviously saw Connor Hellebuyck get a pretty good size contract extension this summer as well. So Hellebuyck hopefully will remain the goaltender of the future here for the Jets for many years to come. Obviously, like I mentioned, in goal, it's not quite totally clear yet if they're going to go with Eric Comrie or Laurent Brossoit as the backup goaltender. Either way, they need those guys, either of them, to be able to play 20 to 25 games and give Hellebuyck the rest when he really needs it. However, at this point, it's not quite clear which of those guys are going to grab that spot just yet, but I'm going to say more than likely it is Brossoit. Now, so far in NHL training camp, the Jets kind of been juggling their defensive lineup here a little bit as well. Right now, it looks as though the top 6 guys will likely be as follows. Obviously, Dustin Byfuglien might be playing here with Tyler Myers. They've been experimenting with that through training camp, and that's certainly a possibility that they may go that route. Obviously, one of your pairs is going to be Josh Morrissey and Jacob Trouba. If they decide to leave Myers with Byfuglien and they obviously have Trouba and Morrissey together, obviously that will be your top 4 guys, no doubt. Your bottom pair very well could be a combination of a few different guys, but I'm suspecting with Dmitry Kulikov being back from injury, he more than likely grabs one of those spots. The other spot very well could be a youngster like Tucker Pullman, or they may continue to go with a guy like Ben Sherratt or Joe Morrow. They have more than enough capable defensemen here with this lineup. They also have a youngster, Sami Niku, who certainly has earned an opportunity for sure, but with the number of guys they have under NHL contract, it's probably not going to happen, at least for the start of the year. But depending on how things go with this roster throughout the year, injuries, whatnot, we could see Sami Niku or even Tucker Pullman get a fair bit of playing time here as the season goes on. Now, your forward group is pretty set in stone here for your top 6 group. I fully suspect to see Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler, and Kyle Connor continue to form your top line. I don't think we have any doubts about that. More than likely, you see Brian Little return to be the number 2 center to play with Patrick Laine and Nikolai Ehlers. Although Paul Maurice has been playing around with some different line combinations here in training camp, so we could possibly see a different look. But more than likely, that's the go-to top 6 lines. I would not be surprised at all by the end of the year if Jack Roslovic becomes that number 2 center and bumps Little out of that spot. I do think it's quite possible, though, with Brian Little's NHL experience, as well as his experience playing with Ehlers and Laine on that line, that he more likely gets first crack at it, though, to start the year. If that's the case, Jack Roslovic more than likely centers your 3rd line, probably playing with Matthew Perreault. Your fourth line more than likely is guys like Lowry, Comp, and Tanev, although one of them could jump up to the third line as well. So overall, I think that's a pretty solid lineup for the Winnipeg Jets. It's not a whole lot different from last year. Instead, a lot of the guys that left the team, for the most part, were spare parts, outside of Paul Stastny, who did play a bigger role down the stretch and into the playoffs. But I do think with the emergence of a guy like Roslovic, that they will be just fine. Now, as far as their projections and my predictions for the Jets this coming season, I fully suspect all the success they had last year to continue and certainly be built upon. I do think that this year the Winnipeg Jets overtake the Predators for first place in the Central Division. They will certainly have a shot at the President's Trophy. We're not going to go quite that far with it here to predict the President's Trophy, but I do see them winning the Central Division, having another deep playoff run. I do see them as being one of the strongest Stanley Cup contenders. If you watched my video for the 2019 Stanley Cup playoff predictions I made, I know it was really early to do that, but I did have Winnipeg pegged as my favorite to win the Stanley Cup. So obviously, Jets fans, I'm sure you'd love to see that. Would obviously love to see a Canadian team win the Stanley Cup and bring it back to Canada. It's been way too long, and I do think the Jets are the strongest team, most likely capable of doing that this year. So that's your season preview here for the Winnipeg Jets. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. What do you expect of the Jets this season? What do you think they're going to accomplish? Do you think they can take what they did last year and build upon it and take it a step further? If you're new to the channel here, hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.